China's Summer Davos wrapped up in Dalian. The World Economic Forum's three-day meeting drew more than 1,700 attendees from nearly 80 nations and regions. This year's theme was Next Frontiers for Growth, and discussion centered, of course, on the global economy, climate change, technical advancements. Li Qiang spoke about decoupling and called for joint efforts in deepening exchanges and cooperation. Okay, to review some of the outcomes of those Summer Davos sessions, we're joined by Anthony Chan. He, of course, is the former chief economist at J.P. Morgan. Always good to see you. Thanks very much. This has been kind of fascinating to watch unfold. Let's talk about the overall goals of this meeting and for a worldwide audience. Explain the obvious differences from Davos and other global meetings.
Well, this meeting, Sean, is obviously more China-centric than, say, the other Davos meeting, which is obviously more global in nature. But I think it comes at a good time because we are seeing, in fact, some forces out there where people or countries are moving in the direction of nearshoring or decoupling and things like that. And I think that this meeting really tells many of these countries that that's not really a good thing, because the reality is you need greater cooperation, because when you have greater cooperation, you can have more trade, and more trade means you'll be able to increase productivity, you'll be able to have comparative advantage, and certainly standards of living go up with more trade rather than with less trade. Now, obviously, geopolitical risk and geopolitical unrest are also playing a role. But I think this meeting is trying to slow that down and tell countries to calm down and, in fact, focus on the things that will increase the standard of living for many of these countries over a long period of time.
Yeah, with that in mind, Anthony, talk about Premier Li's speech with 80 nations and regional leaders there. What was his message to the world? Clearly, one aspect is China is open for business.
Well, one of the messages, of course, is that China's open for business. But I think he really was trying to say, look, we are sort of addressing the whole world with open arms. We want to be transparent. We want to be open. We want to cooperate. And this is a strong message that I think will resonate if somehow Chinese and other countries heed those words and, in fact, take them to heart. So far, certainly over the last 12 months, even the last 18 months, we've been moving in the other direction. And that's why I think that speech was very important, basically to offset some of that negative movement away from free trade between countries and free trade between China and the rest of the world.
Yeah, and one thing we've heard from China in the past about the United States is that the U.S. leans on its allies to kind of keep a wedge between China and those various countries, especially when it comes to, are you going to put it ahead of the U.S. in terms of trade, things like that. So talk about the state of China's relationship with other nations and foreign businesses. We saw some thaw in the EU, for example, when it comes to a discussion about tariffs on EVs.
Yes, in fact, what you saw was some encouraging movements from Europe to really propose tariffs that are much smaller than the ones that were proposed by the United States. But remember that there's not a lot of EV activity between China and the United States. So when Europe moves in the direction of much smaller tariff, that's really significant because that's real trade. There's not a lot of real trade between U.S. and China with regard to EV, but that is not the case with Europe. So I was encouraged by that, and I hope and my expectation is that moving forward, that countries will in fact follow in the footstep of what Europe is doing, and that is to try to ease tensions to some extent and not sort of be so focused on eliminating the possibility that trade will grow between those two geographical areas.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly and talk about AI, artificial intelligence, at this week's meetings.
Well, I think I was very encouraged because China certainly gets high marks for the technology improvements that they're making. Obviously, you still need a little bit more cooperation between the countries than you're seeing right now. But if you build upon that innovation, hopefully the cooperation will come later. And you certainly heard that those words time and time again during the meeting, that only through cooperation between countries are we going to make progress. And that message is loud and clear, and it's certainly true. So we hope that these countries will, in fact, have listened to that message.
You know, in 25 minutes, of course, the first presidential debate is going to take place here in the United States. And really, these two candidates, Republican Donald Trump, Democrat Joe Biden, could not be further polar opposite when it comes to climate. So talk about the climate buzz at the Summer Davos, where you think that could be heading, because that's one area that so many nations really do have so much in common.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the things that China made very clear, that if you don't sort of promote trade, especially with the advantages that China has when it comes to climate change, that in fact it's going to be a setback. It's going to be a setback for many of the agreements and many of the goals that these countries cherish so much. So China certainly has a comparative advantage in helping the rest of the world reach their green goals sooner and faster. And I hope that that other countries were listening, because that was an important message. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, the U.S. could be on the outside looking in on this one. Finally, talk about some of the other issues perhaps that didn't garner the big headlines, perhaps creating some kind of buzz at Summer Davos. Any other takeaways?
Well, I think the other takeaways were that somehow there was no finger pointing towards countries. I think that that was encouraging. Certainly, they put everything on the table, and certainly the difficult issues. But I think it was more conciliatory in nature. And I hope that people and countries noticed that, because the Chinese, I thought, went out of their way to be more diplomatic about the challenges that the United States and China faces, and the diplomatic challenges that China and Europe faces, by not finger pointing, and certainly keeping the discussion in a positive light. That was very, very constructive.
Good stuff. Anthony Chan, thank you as always. We appreciate your insight.
My pleasure.